Hi, I'm back with another share of one of my junk journals. Again, my junk journals are always from the perspective of having belonged to someone. It's the way my mind works. I can't just like make a general journal. I don't know why. I really admire people who can just they'll just make something and it's just a random, with images and things. My brain has to be focused. So in this one, my subject is Howard Lovecraft. My husband is a huge Lovecraft fan, and I wanted to do justice to the character. He's a really interesting guy, pulp writer, or they called them weird writer at the time. He's a really interesting guy from Providence, Rhode Island, and he was married to a woman called Sonia Green. Sonia Green was a real trailblazer of the day. She was an entrepreneur. She was a very forward person. She really was the one who approached Howard, and excuse me, that's how their relationship started. Really cool woman. Howard Lovecraft was an avid letter writer, so I made a little book of stamps here with tear out stamps that he would have most definitely had. And corresponding in the 20s, early 20s, was huge. So there's a lot of addresses he had here of other authors. This is Frank Belknap Long. This is just a postcard that he would have on the ready. And Clark Ashton Smith. Clark Ashton Smith, Robert Howard, and H.P. Lovecraft were very much corresponded with each other. They were three sort of, very good friends, pen pals mostly, but they wrote along the same line. They consulted with each other in their writing, and none of them ever met each other. They only knew each other through correspondence, which is pretty wild. Howard Lovecraft also illustrated, and he was an astronomer early on. He was very much interested in astronomy, wanted to become a professional astronomer, not a writer. And through difficulties with getting certified, in those days, like in school, you had to be certified in reading, writing, arithmetic in order to move on. And he wasn't able to get certified in mathematics, so he never moved on to college, and his dreams of being an astronomer were squashed. But he always incorporated the heavens and the stars in his writings, and it was a huge influence on him. This is actually an image of some of his crazy writings on an envelope for one of his stories, writings, and his illustrations. This is he was also a poet, and this is a little window I have here, and it's for the poem The Window. It's actually just a segment of a poem. He's famous for his Cthulhu. He's like an octopusy kind of looking, very weird kind of guy. And you'll see images of that throughout. There's little pockets with tickets and tags. This is an actual cigarette card from the 20s with poetry on it, which he might have had one of those. I reproduced a little astronomical observations that he made, and interestingly enough, he witnessed Halley's Comet, and he recreated it from his point of view, where he saw it, and made notes. And I've seen actual trajectory of the comet, and he's spot on. He's spot on with his the way he saw it and documented it. It's pretty cool. That's a bookmark. This is a letter to Howard Lovecraft from H.P. Lovecraft from Dr. Howard, which was in Cross Plains, Texas, which was Robert E. Howard's father. Robert E. Howard, when he died, his father, sent a letter to Lovecraft to let him know the circumstance, and I retyped the letter and included it in here. It's a pretty extensive letter that he sent to Lovecraft, knowing how important both of them were in each other's lives, and you know, Howard was devastated by that news. This, I made a little locket of H.P. Lovecraft and his wife Sonia. There are other just like notes, and this is Cthulhu had a language, and that's some of the language. Here's more Robert Howard's address. Farnsworth Wright was a editor of Weird Tales who rejected a lot of Lovecraft stuff. This is a reproduction of just a postcard. Robert E. Howard sent out Christmas postcards, and it would just say best wishes for a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And Lovecraft, I'm sure, had one. And so I just wanted to memorialize that fact and stick it in a journal. This is more of Lovecraft's writings. Very hard to read his handwriting. This is so he used to go to Florida. Lovecraft was interesting. Like, if you invited him to come, if you wrote him a letter and said, yeah, you know, my family has a farm here, you could come, and he would go. And so he started going to someone, Barlow's Florida home, and he spent his time in the summer in Florida from Providence, and this is actually a picture of him with Barlow and his parents. This is H.P. Lovecraft's illustration of what his Cthulhu would look like. In his head, he envisioned it. This is a page from an Argosy pulp. The way the story goes that Lovecraft trolled one of the writers, Fred Jackson, who he really despised his writing, and he would send comments to the editor in rhyme about how terrible this guy was. And the editor of Argosy actually solicited Lovecraft to submit writing, and that's how he started writing for the pulps, which is pretty funny. This is a concealed paper clip, Orton's General Store in Vermont. So Orton's General Store, you might know today, is the Vermont Country Store. And Lovecraft met these people he was involved in like amateur press with poetry, and he met a couple who were also involved in that. And like I said, they had a grandpa who had a farm in Vermont, and they invited him to come. And he went, and he spent you know, a week or so there, and he loved it. And he was in the newspaper. The Brattleboro Reformer wrote that there was a weird writer in our midst. This is a postcard from Providence that I have Robert E. Howard writing to Lovecraft writing to Robert E. Howard, telling him that he is going to make the journey to meet him finally. And it's in July of 1936, and Robert E. Howard died. And so that wouldn't have ever been able to happen. And this is a postcard from Walter Coates. He ran a amateur publishing poetry magazine, and H.P. Lovecraft was a contributing editor. Also, he was on their board, and he's asking him for a submission, which he did submit poetry to his publication. This is, I bought from the Lovecraft Society. It's a copy of an envelope of the writings of Robert Howard, I keep saying Robert E. Howard, of H.P. Lovecraft at the Mountain of Madness. And you can see he must have had an inspiration while he was not at home, and he had a letter, so he was writing everything that he could write on this envelope. And in actuality, the envelope is detached, and he wrote on both sides, on the inside and the outside of the envelope. But I just constructed the envelope back so you have the idea that that's what he did. Pretty cool. This is a copy of his that I made of his last will and testament, which is pretty interesting to read. Here I gave him a prize. I gave him #1 best for poetry in his United Amateur Poetry Association, 1917, which he was the president of. This is an illustration that was sent to him, that I say was sent to him from Clark Ashton Smith. Clark Ashton Smith later, this became a bookplate illustration of his, so it's pretty cool. Some tickets, a tarot card. This is a cabinet card of young H.P. Lovecraft with his parents. So cute. And this, I included it's fake divorce papers, but I included this to illustrate, like, I always heard that, Lovecraft was, he really wasn't into women, he wasn't really good with relationships, and, he was married, but they divorced very quickly, and it didn't work out. And actually, the reason why they got divorced had nothing to do with not being compatible or in love or whatever. It was an insecurity that Lovecraft had. It was the depression. Things were hard for everybody. He moved from the comfort of his house with his aunts where he lived in Providence. When he got married, he moved in with his wife Sonia, and they moved to Brooklyn, New York, and he was really a fish out of water. He was very fearful of his surroundings and different things and different people, and also of being insecure in his living arrangement. And when Sonia lost her business, she took a position in Chicago, and Howard was afraid to go. He didn't want to leave with her. So he stayed in Brooklyn. She went to Chicago, and she was working in Chicago and basically supporting him. He did little tiny writing odd jobs. He basically didn't do anything other than writing. He wouldn't do anything. And she's like, this can't happen. Like, this is unsustainable. Eventually, he went back to Providence to live with his aunts, and his wife filed for divorce, and he's like, I don't want to be divorced. We could just stay married, and we can live apart. And she's like, I don't want that kind of a marriage. I want us to be together, and if we can't be together, it doesn't make sense to still be married. And so she filed for divorce and sent him the papers, and Howard Lovecraft never signed his divorce papers. So legally, they were never actually divorced. They stayed married. And so he died a married man. He got his wish. He was married and lived apart from his wife, and she had no idea. She remarried, and she remarried, and she was still married, and she had no idea until after he passed, when they found it, and they found that out. It was very bizarre. These are this is Yule Horror, one of his writings, and one of his quotes. He said, only poetry or madness could do justice to the noises. And this, I have a reproduction, I made it up, of Weird Tales letterhead, and a letter from Farnsworth Wright rejecting stories from Howard Lovecraft. And I wanted to put this in because these are really the Call of Cthulhu, at the Mountains of Madness, and The Shadow over Ismail. These are like his top-rated stories, and Farnsworth Wright rejected them. So he didn't reject them all at once. I just wanted to illustrate that fact. And I put Howard Philip Lovecraft. It was Phillips with an S, but I just was like taking a shot at his credibility or his competence, because I'm like, if he doesn't even know the guy's name, so how could he reject these stories? But he did reject them. Later on, he did publish Cthulhu later on, but it's unbelievable that he rejected his most famous stories. But anyway, that's my Lovecraft journal. I hope you enjoyed that.